Happy holidays, Seward Elementary. I am here today because every year I read my very favorite book to all the classrooms at Seward Elementary. That book is Red Ranger Came Calling by Berkeley Breathed. Since you guys aren't in school this year, I decided to record myself reading this book, and then you can watch it at home. Don't forget that this is quite a long book, so if you need to get a snack or a drink, go ahead and do that. Then find a good place to snuggle down, and don't forget, if you've heard it before, don't give away the ending. The ending is the best part. This book is full of Christmas magic, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I do. Red Ranger Came Calling. A guaranteed true Christmas story. This is dedicated to the author's father, the Red Ranger, of course. He's finally up there somewhere, just off Pluto, maybe. In 1939, my father was 9 years old. Then and for the rest of his life, he was called Red by everyone but his mother, who thought the name saucy. People guessed wrongly that the name honored the thatch of orange debris atop of his head that made it look like a freckled ostrich egg on fire. The name's true source was a popular cinema hero, Buck Tweed, the Red Ranger of Mars, protector of the 23rd century and savior of grateful princesses. It was he, the Red Ranger from the movies, that my father chose to confuse with himself, and it was that universe cluttered with space Nazis and princess nabbers that seemed to need him more than his own. But the key to such a world still eluded him, an official Buck Tweed 2-speed Crime Stopper Star Hopper bicycle. It's with a bicycle that the story begins and ends, a story that my father, the former Red Ranger of Mars, told us on the Christmas Eves of my own childhood. I've put his adventure to pictures here. It's historical truth guaranteed by the Red Ranger himself. But the truth, like the daydreams of 9-year-old boys, is slippery and prone to readjustment over time. I can only submit to you the tale itself as he told it in his own words, plus the evidence still there in the forest, of course. And here's a cute little picture of Red. Christmas, 1939. During the Depression years before the Second War, my folks would banish me from East Orange, New Jersey to Michigan for the school year, and then ship me to upstate New York for summer camp. The lone remaining month for Christmas would find me on a train to my Aunt Vi's house on Vashon, a damp little island somewhere off the country's upper left-hand corner. It was an out-of-the-way corner, but a good place to grow things, where strawberries and sour-faced little boys might ripen up sweeter. Or so my mother told me each time she sent me away. But on Christmas Eve of 1939, I'd grown no sweeter at all. My prize eluded me, a Buck Tweed 2-speed Crime Stopper Star Hopper bicycle. It sat there gleaming in the Vashon hardware store window, tantalizing earthlings with its spine-tingling glamour. The Red Ranger of Mars, me, visited this place daily like a cow returning to a salt lick. There I would loiter, miserable in bicycle poverty, kept company by Amelia, Aunt Vi's Dalmatian wiener dog mix. Most of the time, Amelia just snoozed nearby, dreaming like me of other places and other lives far away. But it was 1939, and although Christmas Eve had arrived, dreams were unaffordable. Amelia and I headed home, with mine far behind in a store window. And you can barely see Amelia down here snoozing away. As usual, I looked for delays on the walk home. Aunt Vi would be waiting, and we made each other equally uncomfortable. so I saw no reason to hurry. That evening's detour brought me and Amelia past the ramshackle lighthouse, perched high in the mist on Point Robinson. As always, we paused to consider the old house's legend. Island old-timers insisted that its unseen occupant, old Sonder Claus, was actually Santa Claus himself. The real McCoy of childish fancy migrated down from the north to spend his final days in secretive retirement on Vashon Island. It took folks far more fruity than the Red Ranger of Mars to be tricked into believing such twaddle. Like many my age, I knew that Santa Claus and the Tooth Fairy and the Easter Bunny were just that many more promises hatched by those who weren't very good at keeping any. As we turned to leave, an astonishingly squat little guy, no bigger than me, rushed past us toward the old lighthouse. He carried an overnight carpet bag, which bumped along behind him. The tiny man smiled weakly and tipped his hat to reveal pointy ears. Something flowery needed to be said by the Red Ranger of Mars, but in my shock, all that came out was, "Mister, you look like a turnip." I could not recall ever actually seeing a genuine elf, nor calling one a vegetable, but I was certain that I just had. An elf, you know whose elf, to a dyed-in-the-wool everything dadder such as myself. It was mind-boggling. That evening, Aunt Vi asked me to help pin up some old holiday magazine pictures, but I declined, as my mind had been freshly boggled. Vi noticed my peculiar mood and offered to let me open my Christmas gift from her early. It was a glorious buck tweed space uniform, the bonus highlight being a large red R zooming across the breastplate. I tried it on, and she flung her hand across her brow, swooning from the swashbuckling drama of it all. We had finally discovered our first bit of common ground. But my Space Ranger senses detected that the jersey was in truth last year's cast-off pajama top, dyed Ranger red and altered by the loving hands of his gimmer. Pajamas, I said with crushing disappointment. I didn't speak again. But my fingers explored the familiar cloth, and my expression hid none of my defeat. Vi turned away, hiding her own. I did not typically give much thought to the feelings of others, and true to form, I did not that night. My mother used to tell me that there was a natural order to things, and that mine must have been prickliness. She said that blaming me or anyone else for my distant nature would be like blaming a polar bear for eating Canadians. It was the natural order, and that was that. I thought of this as I went up to bed. And you can see Vi looking pretty sad that he did not like his Red Ranger top since it was old pajamas. As I lay there in the dark, my thoughts returned to the earlier elf sighting. He had looked like the real thing, and elves to Santa Claus are like horseflies to a horse. One means that the other is nearby. For a child, even me, it was all too tempting to believe. But then wasn't everything and everybody? It occurred to me that a kid's life was one long opportunity for having the rug pulled out from below him at every step. Myself, I was determined to stay on my feet. Still, a fraud was surely afoot. And it was the sworn duty of the Red Ranger of Mars to stick his nose deep into such things. Amelia followed, looking doubtful. As I dropped out my window, I bent low and then crept off into the island fog to unmask a humbug. The Sonder Claus house teetered high above the pounding surf, the moon igniting the rising mist into blue phosphorescence. Ancient toys in disrepair littered the steps like ghosts from a baby's bad dream. We clambered past an old sign nailed into the rock. Visitors not received with zesty jolliness at the moment. I almost turned back right there. I was growing uneasy about the whole matter, and a public guarantee of grumpiness didn't help. I knocked on the huge door unzestfully. The big door swung open. The little, pointy-eared old man from before stood there holding a tea tray, scowling. The light from an enormous fire behind him made the room flicker with grotesque shadows. My thoughts turned to retreat, but instead, I stood at attention. I said, "The Red Ranger of Mars has come calling," and I bowed deeply over shaking knees. The little man scowled further, but motioned for us to enter. The terrible shadows were caused by monstrous toys looming in the corner. And dozing in a fantastic chair was what I figured to be old Sonder Claus, the most ancient man I have ever seen. He coughed quietly and breathed with a rattling wheeze of great antiquity. His body, shrunken and folded, looked as though it had retreated from life itself. Before I could announce myself again, he spoke without looking up. "Turn around," he said in a voice the age of the mountains. "Go home. Go back to bed. What you're looking for isn't here. I'm 435 years old, which makes me very tired." Even in my mounting terror, I was grateful to meet another skilled liar. "I'm Buck Tweed, the Red Ranger of Mars, 602 years old," I said, adding as a bonus, "and I do not believe in Santa Claus." With that, the little elf shuddered and looked in horror to his master, whose eyes had ignited. The old man began to push himself up from his huge chair, and he finally looked at me, glowering. Frankly, this was more than I could take. I panicked and shot the old faker with my disintegrating ray gun. And you can see right there on his forehead. He's got one of those suction cup darts. The old man sank back into his chair, stunned, as if a tuna fish were stuck to his forehead and not a dart. He pulled it off, then motioned with a bony hand for me to approach. I did, deeply regretting my violence. When I got close, he took my pistol and held it up gingerly for a better look. His eyes widened. "Never," he said, "have I made such a thing. What is it for?" His question brought me back to comfortable territory, masking my panic. I said, "Why, I've shot down a fleet of Nazi attack ships with that. I've mowed down a mob of Venetian Hottentots. I've even burned a hole through Mars's moon and singed fannies on Pluto." I had been infected with the room's atmosphere of malarkey. I gave him another chance to hatch one himself. "They say you're Santa Claus." His face darkened. "Santa Claus," he said, repeating the name as though it hurt. His eyes looked ahead and seemed to focus beyond the walls. "He's a foolish story for small children. He's a big, jolly bribe to control their natural criminal instincts." He chuckled at this without smiling. "It's been that way for a long time. But it wasn't always." His eyes focused back on me. Smiling sadly, he said, "He's old now, and the times are newer. People are newer." He studied my ray gun. "Who'd believe now?" "I'd believe," I said, but I wasn't sure at all. I had to see what the old fruitcake had up his sleeve. I'd believe if he could make a reindeer fly. For the first time, a light brightened in his eyes. The elf looked appalled and whispered,